Hey guys, I'm Abby, and in today's video we will be going over the basics of sewing from your machine, how you thread it, and just the different things that you'll need to know when you're just starting to learn how to sew. And we'll also go over how to sew a basic seam. So let's get to it.
All right, so here we have our sewing machine. Now I have the Singer Tradition. Now every machine does pretty much the same thing, but there are just different dials and a few tweaks here and there that may be different, but your length, your stitches, all of that should be fairly the same. So first we have here the hand dial. This is what you'll use when you want to manually make a stitch instead of using the foot pedal. Typically I use this when I'm going over anything bulky and I just don't want to rush right through this stitch because that could break a needle. I'll also use the hand wheel when I'm just starting a stitch. So you always want to make sure you start with the needle and the fabric, and to do that you're going to turn the hand wheel towards you. That's counterclockwise. Never turn it the opposite way. That could mess up your machine. So the first dial that we have here is going to be the length stitch. This is simply how long the length of your stitch will be. The standard length stitch would be 2.5, but you can keep it anywhere between 2 and 3, of course, just depending on what you're sewing. Now, the length 0 is for like a buttonhole stitch or just for a tighter seam. That stitch will go on top of one another. A length of 4 would be for like a basting or gathering stitch. That's a much looser stitch, but you want to keep it between 2 and 3. So here we have the width dial. This is used when you're using a zigzag stitch to make them more wide or less wide. Now your 0 is going to be the narrow, and then the 5 would be the widest length that they have. When it comes to your straight stitches, this doesn't matter. This is also used just to move your needle to the right or to the left, as it's just going straight. Here we have our tension dial, and the tension is how tight the threads are pulled as you sew. So the tighter your thread is, the higher your tension is, and then the looser your threads are, that would be a lower tension setting. I do typically keep mine between 3 and 4, that's standard, but it just depends on what you're sewing that it may need to be adjusted. Now here we have our stitch dial. This just has many different stitch designs that you can use. However, the most common is going to be your straight stitch and your zigzag stitch. Honestly, those two are all I really use. And then there is the button stitch here as well if you want to sew a button. Now, the other stitches are like for an overcast stitch, or if you want to finish your seam and you don't have a serger, you can use one of those as well. Now, you also see these stitches in the color blue. Again, every machine is different. You probably have a lot of different stitches you can use. If you want to get to the blue color stitches, you want to go to the length dial, and you see that blue coloring that says S1, you're going to turn it to that, and then that will activate the blue stitches and you can use those, and then just turn it back to regular when you just want to use the black stitches. Again, the straight and zigzag stitch will be the most common stitch you use. Now here we have the reverse lever here. Now this is what you use when you're starting or ending a stitch. This is what's going to secure the stitch and make sure it doesn't get undone. Now here's where you're going to put your bobbin. Your bobbin is what you'll put at the bottom of your machine, and we'll go over that in detail, but you'll basically just snap it on and then you'll wind that bobbin. And this is what the bobbin looks like, and as you see, it's similar to the diagram. You'll just put that on, snap it to the right, and then it'll start winding. Now here we have where we put your spool of thread at the top of the machine, and we'll go over threading in detail in a bit as well. Here is the handle of the machine when you want to carry your machine. Here we have the needle, and this right here is the little screw that you can screw when you're changing your needle. And then we have the needle plate here, or the throat plate. This is where you'll place your fabric as you're sewing. If you do see these lines here, that's actually going to be where you guide your fabric to make sure it's straight. And then here it's going to be the feed dogs. That's what's grabbing your fabric and pulling it through. Here we have the foot. And to change the foot, there should be something at the back of the machine like a lever. You want to press it and it'll drop the foot down. In order to put on a new foot, you want to press it and then snap the foot in, and when it's in, then let go, and it should be secure. Here is a manual way to thread your needle. I don't really use it. It's hard for me to get it to work. There's also a button switch, which you will pull down the lever, and you want to make sure it snaps. So here it's snapped down, and that's how you know it's ready to sew a button. So here is the compartment storage that most machines have. When we open it up, we'll see what is called a bobbin. This is what we'll be threading in just a bit. So you open it up and here's what your bobbin will look like. And then you will just put that in. And many machines are newer actually have a drop-in bobbin where you drop it in at the top. Mine is a bit older, so it's a front-loaded bobbin. Here's just the storage compartment that I use to store my needles, my bobbins, and the different foots that I'll use so I have it ready for sewing. Now here we'll take a look at the back of the machine where you'll see a lever. You put it down, which puts your foot down, which you'll have it down when you're sewing, and then you'll put it back up when you're done sewing or when you want to switch the foot that you're using. Now to the side of the machine here, we have a blade that most machines should have so that when you finish sewing, you can cut your thread off. So back to the front of the machine here, you'll notice your machine should come with a light so that you can clearly see when you're sewing. If the light is not on, your machine will not work, and to turn it on, you'll just press the button. It should be at the side of the machine. And then here's a cord at the bottom that connects to your foot pedal. This is what's going to control your speed of your sewing. You just want to play around with that and find a nice tempo. Alright, so let's get to the fun part of how to thread your machine. So here's a spool of thread. This is what most threads typically look like. Of course, each can vary. There should be a hole. That's where you'll place the spool onto. Make sure your thread is coming underneath like you see here. Put it into the hole and then bring that thread to the front. And there should be something secure that you can place that thread to make sure it holds still. Before we thread the machine, we're going to wind the bobbin. To do that, there should be diagrams that you see here. There should be a nudge and you'll place the thread. In that nudge, it should typically snap. You'll hear like a click. Then there'll be a button at the top here. You want to place that thread in between that slit like you see here again. You should hear another slit to make sure it's in securely. Then you'll just wrap that around again, following those diagrams on your machine. Now we will get a bobbin. This is what your bobbin should look like. There are some metal bobbins as well, but they should have a hole like you see here, and you're gonna place the thread into that hole. That way the bobbin will wind by itself. Now I'm sure you can see there are multiple holes in this bobbin, but you wanna make sure you're only placing it at the top hole. Like you see, it just goes through that top of the hole, and then you're going to place that onto the bobbin. And as you can see the diagram, it looks similar to how the diagram has it. So again, just look at the diagram to make sure you're doing it correctly. Now you want to place that bobbin on top of that bobbin winder here, and make sure you hold the thread because it may slip out and then you'll have to redo it again. So just hold that thread secure, place it onto the bobbin winder, then snap it to the right, put your foot on the foot pedal, and then the bobbin should start winding, and it'll continue winding. You can keep winding it to as full as you would like. Now take your foot off of the foot pedal and snap it back to the left. You'll want to cut that thread, and this is what it will look like. And you can also cut the thread that we put into that hole, and we'll set this aside for later when we place it into our bobbin case. Now we'll continue to thread the machine as normal. So you'll keep the thread in the same place as when you're winding a bobbin. Keep it through that first silver knob there. But instead of this button that you see, we'll take that out, or you could also cut it. And we're going to instead put that thread under this slit here. It's just a little compartment. You'll just slide that thread through. Then you're going to bring it down to number 2. Follow the numbers. Bring it down to 2 into the slit. Then bring it around and under where you see the number 3. Then you'll bring that back up and go to number 4. Now at number 4, the lever here, you want to make sure the thread goes through that lever in the tiny little hole. Make sure that thread is there, otherwise you'll have some tension issues and we don't want that. So that was number 4. Now bring it down to number 5, and again you want to place the thread here into the little slits that you see and place that down. Now we'll thread your needle. To thread your needle, you're just going to take your thread, push it right through the needle hole. It's a small hole. Sometimes you can lick the thread, get it a little bit wet, and it'll go in easier. Then you'll just bring that under the foot to the back of the machine and out of your way. Now we're going to put in our bobbin. So our bobbin here is a front-loaded bobbin. Again, some people's have the drop-in bobbin, which would be at the top here. It just depends on your machine. For mine, there is going to be a little notch there, and to take your bobbin out, you'll flip it open, pull it out, and here's our bobbin case. And now we're going to take the bobbin that we wound earlier, and you want to make sure it looks like a P, so the thread should be hanging out like a P. Snap that in, and there's a few notches here that you want to make sure that thread clicks in. So there's one here, click that in, and then there should be another one at the top. Slide it through, slide it under, and then you just want to snap that in here. And as you see, it's snapped in, so we know that's secure. Leave a little bit of a thread tail hanging out, and then we will put that in our bobbin. So here is a small little compartment. You want to make sure that matches up with the one on the bobbin case. Open that and place it right in there, and again, it should snap. A lot of the times with these machines, when you hear that snap, you know everything is secure. Then you let go and it's all set. Before you close the case, you're going to hold on to that thread, bring it up and out of your way to the top of the machine, then close the case. Before you start sewing, you always want to grab onto that top thread. Then you're going to turn your hand wheel towards you. As I said earlier, always turn it counterclockwise until it makes one stitch, and that's going to lock the bottom and top stitch. To take that out, just get a pair of scissors or tweezers and unravel that, and then you're going to hold that thread and move it to the back of the machine. And now we're ready to start our first basic stitch. Now here's a closer look at the feed dogs. While you're sewing, this is what's going to be pulling that fabric through the machine, meaning you don't have to pull or tug the fabric. Use the lines on your machine as a guide so that when you sew, you know you're sewing a straight stitch. This is the take-up lever, and you always want to make sure when you start or finish a stitch, your take-up lever is at the top of the machine, and that's where you use your hand wheel to bring it to the top. Alright, so now that we've learned how to use your sewing machine, how to thread it, how to wind your bobbin, we'll learn how to sew a basic seam using the straight stitch. So anytime you start sewing, you want to make sure you grab your thread and move that to the back of your machine under your foot. That way it's out of your way. Now you want to go to the take-up lever and put that down in the back of the machine. Make sure your foot is down when you start sewing. And then you want to take your hand wheel and move that needle down into the fabric, right? So take your hand wheel, turn it counterclockwise. Once it's down in the needle, now we're ready to start sewing. So did end up doing the first few stitches using my hand wheel. You don't have to do that. Once your needle is in your fabric, you can just go straight to the back stitch, but I opted to do the first few stitches with my hand needle like you see here. But now we can put that reverse lever down and then put your foot pedal down, and that will do a back stitch. Remove your hand from the lever, and then you'll just sew a straight stitch as normal. Go slow, and again, don't ever look at the needle. Instead, look at the lines on your needle plate to ensure you're sewing a straight stitch. Now here we're at the end, so we're going to use the back stitch lever again, do a few stitches, and then we're going to let go and then continue sewing and finish that stitch. Now here, as you see, the needle is inside the fabric, and anytime you start or finish a stitch, you want to always make sure your lever is up and your needle is out the fabric. So I placed the foot in the up position, and now we can use that blade to cut that piece of thread, and we can look at our first stitch. So as you see here, it's super straight, looks pretty neat. At the top of the stitch, you'll notice it's thicker because we did a back stitch, which is a good thing. Now we know those seams will not be coming undone. So this is what it'll look like, and then when you open it, you'll see the seam, and typically you do want to iron this, that way it comes out neat. Now we're going to do a zigzag stitch, which can be used to enclose that edge of the fabric to make sure it doesn't fray like you see here. If you don't have a serger, a zigzag stitch can also be an alternative. So again, put the needle into the fabric, place your foot down, and then just start sewing. You do want to do a back stitch here. I didn't do that, but make sure you back stitch, then forward stitch, and continue sewing. Go straight and make sure your fabric is lined up to one of those lines. Again, we're stopping, the needle is in the fabric. You should do a back stitch here. Make sure you put that needle up, and here is the final result. So now you know how to do a straight and zigzag stitch. With this zigzag stitch, that fabric will not fray. Just to recap, when you start sewing, you want to make sure that your lever is at the top of the machine. Make sure when you start sewing, you put your foot down and your needle is inside the fabric. And also, never look at the needle when you're sewing. Look at the guided lines on your needle plate to ensure you have a straight stitch. Alright, so I hope you found this video super helpful. Again, every machine is different, but they all do have the basic function, so this should be able to help you. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Follow me on all my socials, that way you can learn how to sew.